I was standing in what used to be my grandfather's land when a woman with a blonde bob haircut and a fluorescent pink vest marched toward me like she owned the place. The vest said HOA Board President in bold black letters, and her face was already twisted into the expression I'd come to recognize as the universal look of someone about to tell me I couldn't do something. "Excuse me, sir, but this is private community property," she announced, stopping about 5 feet away with her hands on her hips. "You need to leave immediately unless you're a resident of Meadowbrook Estates." I looked down at the surveyor I'd hired, then back at her. "Actually, this is my property. My name is Quincy Quade, and my grandfather owned this land long before your community existed." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm Patricia Henderson, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA board, and I can assure you that this park has been community property since 1998. We have the documents to prove it." The surveyor, a quiet guy named Jim, cleared his throat. "Madam, according to the deed I've been examining, this 3-acre parcel was never sold by the Quade family. The property line runs right through what you're calling a park." Patricia's face flushed red. "That's impossible. I've lived here for 15 years. This has always been our community park." I pulled out the folded copy of my grandfather's deed from my jacket pocket. My grandfather, William Quade, bought this land in 1962, 36 acres total. When the developer bought the surrounding property in 1995, this section wasn't included in the sale. My grandfather passed away in 2019, and the land went to my father. My father passed last year, and now it's mine. "You're lying," Patricia said flatly. "If that were true, we would know about it." "Would you?" I asked. "Because I'm guessing the developer who built your community wasn't exactly advertising that they didn't own all the land they were promising to buyers." "Did anyone actually do a title search on the park property?" Jim nodded. "Mr. Quade's story checks out. I've verified the deed at the county recorder's office. This land was never transferred. The developer who built Meadowbrook Estates apparently just assumed they could use it, or maybe they hoped no one would notice." Patricia's jaw tightened. "We've maintained this park for decades. We've paid for the playground equipment, the benches, the landscaping. You can't just show up and claim it." "I'm not claiming it," I said. "It's already mine, has been my family's for 64 years. This is ridiculous. I'm calling our HOA attorney." Patricia pulled out her phone and started dialing, but she didn't walk away. She stood right there, glaring at me while she waited for someone to pick up. I turned back to Jim. "How much of the park is actually on my land?" He consulted his equipment and the plat map he'd brought. "About 2/3 of it. The playground, the picnic area, and most of the open field. The parking lot and that small section with the basketball court appear to be on actual HOA property." "Of course they are," I muttered. The irony wasn't lost on me that the only part they legitimately owned was the least useful section. Patricia was speaking rapidly into her phone. "Yes, I need you to come to the community park immediately. We have a situation. Someone is claiming they own the land and they have a surveyor." She paused. "I don't care if you're at lunch, Marcus. This is an emergency." She hung up and pointed at me. "Our attorney will be here in 20 minutes and he's going to sort this out. You're going to look very foolish when he proves you're wrong. I hope he brings the HOA's title insurance information," I said, "because you're going to need it." The next 20 minutes were awkward. Patricia stood watch over us like we were criminals planning to steal the swing set. A few residents wandered by, curious about what was happening. Patricia explained to each of them that I was trying to steal their park, which wasn't exactly accurate, but I didn't have the energy to argue with everyone. The attorney, Marcus Brennan, arrived in a silver BMW. He was younger than I expected, maybe 35, with styled dark hair and an expensive suit. He shook Patricia's hand first, then approached me with a professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Quade, is it?" "I'm Marcus Brennan, attorney for Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Patricia tells me there's been some confusion about property lines." "No confusion," I said, handing him a copy of the deed. "This land belongs to me. It was never sold to the developer who built this community." Marcus scanned the document, his smile fading slightly. "May I ask what your intentions are here?" "Right now, I'm having the property surveyed because I wanted to know the exact boundaries. Long term, I haven't decided." "I see." He folded the paper and handed it back to me. "Mr. Quade, regardless of what this document says, the HOA has been maintaining this property for over 25 years. There are legal principles like adverse possession that might apply here. I'd expected this. Adverse possession in Oregon requires 10 years of continuous, open, and hostile possession. but it also requires that the possession be without permission of the owner. My grandfather knew this land was here. He paid property taxes on it every year until he died. My father continued paying those taxes, and so have I. We never gave permission for its use, we just didn't actively stop it. Marcus's expression became more guarded. You'll forgive me if I verify that claim. Please do. The county tax assessor will confirm that property taxes have been continuously paid on this parcel by the Quade family. That demonstrates we never abandoned the property. Patricia stepped forward. Marcus, this is insane. We have children who play here every day, families who have picnics here. This is the heart of our community. I understand that, Marcus said, but his tone had shifted. He was no longer dismissive. Mr. Quade, would you be willing to discuss this in a more private setting? Perhaps we can reach some kind of arrangement. Like what? Like the HOA purchasing the property from you at a fair market rate. Or perhaps granting us an easement. There are solutions here that don't have to be adversarial. I considered this. I hadn't come here to destroy a children's playground. I'm open to discussions. But I want to be clear that I'm not going to be bullied or threatened into giving up property that legally belongs to me. Of course not, Marcus said smoothly. Why don't we schedule a meeting? I'll need to consult with the HOA board, review all the documentation, and we can sit down together in a few days. That works for me. Patricia looked like she wanted to protest, but Marcus shot her a warning look. Patricia, let's not escalate this unnecessarily. Mr. Quade seems reasonable. She pressed her lips together but nodded. We exchanged contact information, and I left with Jim to finish the survey from the property boundaries that didn't involve standing in front of hostile HOA members. As we walked back to our trucks, Jim said, "You handled that well. Most people would have gotten into a shouting match." My grandfather always said you catch more flies with honey, I replied. Besides, I don't want to take away a park from families. I just want what's rightfully mine to be acknowledged. What are you going to do with it? Honestly, I don't know yet. I inherited my father's house here in Portland too. I've been going through all his paperwork, and that's when I found the deed in the tax payment records. I wanted to see the land for myself before deciding anything. Jim nodded. Well, good luck with the HOA. They don't usually back down easy. He was right about that. 3 days later, I received an email from Marcus requesting a meeting at the HOA office. I showed up at the appointed time, 6 in the evening, and found myself in a small conference room with Marcus, Patricia, and 4 other board members. The setup felt like an ambush. Patricia didn't waste time with pleasantries. Mr. Quade, we've reviewed the situation, and while there may be some historical confusion about property lines, the fact remains that the community has used this land for decades. We're prepared to offer you $15,000 to sign over the deed. I almost laughed. $15,000? For 3 acres in a developed neighborhood. That's more than generous, considering you've done nothing with the land, Patricia said sharply. Marcus cleared his throat. What Patricia means is that we feel this is fair compensation given the circumstances. The land has been integrated into the community, and property values reflect that. Actually, I said, I had an appraiser look at it. Conservative estimate for 3 acres in this location is around $400,000. That's if we're talking about vacant land. If we're discussing what the land is worth to this HOA, given that it contains the primary amenity of your entire community, the value is considerably higher. One of the other board members, an older man named Gerald, spoke up. You're trying to extort us? No, I'm trying to have an honest conversation about property that belongs to me. You've been using it without permission or payment for over 20 years. If anything, I could potentially charge you back rent or damages. Patricia's face went pale, then red. This is outrageous. We're not paying you hundreds of thousands of dollars for land we've already been using. Then what do you propose? I asked calmly. We propose you stop this nonsense and accept our offer, or we'll see you in court, she snapped. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Patricia, let's not make threats, Mr. Quade. Surely we can find a middle ground here. What if we offered $50,000? That's still nowhere near fair market value. What do you want? This came from another board member, a woman named Susan. Do you want to take away the playground? Tear up the picnic areas? Make enemies of everyone in this neighborhood? I want what anyone would want. Fair recognition of my property rights and fair compensation if you want to continue using it. The meeting deteriorated from there. Patricia accused me of being greedy and heartless. Gerald threatened legal action. Susan tried a more emotional appeal, talking about the children and community bonds. Marcus attempted to mediate but wasn't making much progress. Finally, I stood up. I'm going to make this simple. You have 30 days to come back with a realistic offer to purchase the property or to negotiate a long-term lease. If I don't hear from you with something reasonable, I'll be forced to take action to secure my property. What kind of action? Patricia demanded. Posting no trespassing signs, for starters. Potentially filing a lawsuit for unpaid use of my land. I don't want to do any of that, but I also won't be taken advantage of. I left the meeting and drove home feeling frustrated. I really didn't want to be the villain in this story, but I also wasn't going to let an HOA bully me into giving away hundreds of thousands of dollars in property value. Over the next week, things got ugly. Someone started a Facebook group called Save Our Park that painted me as a greedy outsider trying to destroy the community. Never mind that my father had lived in Portland his entire life, and I'd grown up visiting my grandfather on that very land before the development was built. The narrative was set, and I was the bad guy. I started getting angry phone calls and emails. Some were just venting frustration, but a few crossed the line into threats. I documented everything and forwarded the threats to the police, who said they'd keep an eye on things but couldn't do much unless someone actually acted on their words. Then Patricia escalated things. She organized a community meeting at the park itself with at least 100 residents showing up. I wasn't invited, but someone recorded it and sent me the video. Patricia stood on a picnic table and delivered an impassioned speech about standing up to corporate greed and protecting what was theirs. She conveniently left out the part where the land wasn't actually theirs. The next morning, I drove by the park and found that someone had installed a large banner reading "Community Property since 1998 not for sale." They'd also put up a petition table, collecting signatures for something. I parked and walked over to see what they were collecting signatures for. A young woman at the table looked up nervously. "Are you Mr. Quade?" "I am. I'm just helping with the petition. It's not personal." "What's the petition for?" "We're asking the city council to designate this as a historic community park. Patricia says if it gets that designation, you won't be able to do anything with it." I sighed. "That's not how property law works. But go ahead with your petition if it makes people feel better." I walked across the park, examining the playground equipment, the picnic tables, the carefully maintained flower beds. I could see why people loved this place. It was genuinely nice. Kids were playing on the swings, parents were sitting on benches chatting, a group of teenagers was playing basketball on the court that was actually on HOA property. An older woman approached me cautiously. "You're the man who owns the land?" "That's right." "Are you really going to take this away from us?" "I don't want to take anything from anyone. I just want the HOA to acknowledge reality and work with me fairly." "Patricia says you're asking for an unreasonable amount of money." "Patricia offered me $15,000 for land worth several $100,000. Who's being unreasonable?" The woman frowned. "That does seem low. Why would she offer so little?" "You'd have to ask her that." That conversation repeated itself several times over the next few days. Some residents were reaching out to me directly, trying to understand the situation beyond Patricia's narrative. I was honest with all of them. I explained the history, showed them copies of the deed and tax records, and clarified that I wasn't trying to destroy anything. I just wanted fair treatment. A few people started questioning Patricia's handling of the situation. This apparently didn't sit well with her. 2 weeks after our meeting, I received a certified letter from a different law firm. The HOA was suing me for quiet title, claiming adverse possession of the property. They were also seeking an injunction to prevent me from interfering with the park. I immediately called my own attorney, Roger Mendoza, whom I'd consulted earlier about all of this. "They're really going through with it," I told him. "Let me see the filing," Roger said. I scanned and emailed it to him, waiting while he reviewed it. "Okay. Their case is weak. You've got continuous tax payments, and your family never gave permission. Adverse possession requires hostile possession, and the fact that the original owner knew about the land and maintained tax payments defeats that claim. So we fight it? We fight it. And Quincy, we should probably countersue for trespass and fair rental value for the years they've been using your land. Will that help or just make things worse? It'll show you're serious. Right now they think they can outlast you or intimidate you. A counterclaim puts them on defense. Plus, if you win, you might recover attorney's fees. Do it." The lawsuit became public record, and the local news picked it up. Suddenly, I was getting interview requests from reporters. I declined most of them, but I did agree to speak with a journalist from the Oregonian who seemed genuinely interested in the facts rather than just the drama. The article came out 3 days later with the headline, "Property Dispute Reveals Decades-Old Developer Error." It was balanced and accurate, laying out the timeline and the legal issues clearly. It mentioned that the developer who built Meadowbrook Estates had gone out of business in 2003, which meant there was no one left to hold accountable for the original mistake. The article changed the public conversation somewhat. People started asking harder questions about how the HOA had managed the situation. Some residents began requesting to see the HOA's title insurance and documentation for the park. Patricia stonewalled them, which only increased suspicion. Then I got an unexpected call from a man named Victor Dumont, who identified himself as a homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates and a retired real estate attorney. "Mr. Quade, I've been following this situation closely, and I owe you an apology," he said. "I was at Patricia's rally, ready to sign the petition. Then I actually read the deed and the tax records you've been showing people, and I realized you're absolutely in the right here. I appreciate that. More than that, I've been doing some digging into the HOA's finances and records. I'm on the board now, actually. A few of us requested an emergency election after Patricia refused to share documentation. There are some very concerning things I've found." "Like what?" "Like the fact that Patricia has known about your property claim for at least 6 months. She received a letter from your father before he passed away, informing the HOA of the situation and offering to discuss it. She never brought it to the board. She buried it." My stomach tightened. "My father reached out to them?" "He did. I found the letter in Patricia's personal files, which she should have shared with the board. He was trying to resolve this quietly and fairly. Patricia ignored him, apparently hoping the issue would go away." "Why would she do that?" Victor was quiet for a moment. "I think she was afraid of looking bad. Admitting the HOA had been using property it didn't own for decades would reflect poorly on her leadership. She's been president for 10 years, and before that, she was on the board for 5. She should have caught this issue and dealt with it. So she's been covering it up. It appears that way. There's more. The HOA has title insurance, which would likely cover this situation. But claiming on that insurance would require admitting the error, which again makes Patricia look incompetent. So instead, she's been using HOA funds to fight you in court rather than filing an insurance claim that could actually resolve this. That's got to be a breach of her fiduciary duty to the HOA members. It is. And those of us who have figured this out are not happy. We're calling for a vote to remove Patricia from the board and to authorize settlement negotiations with you. This was a development I hadn't expected. What's the timeline on that? HOA bylaws require a 30-day notice for such a vote. But in the meantime, I wanted to reach out to you personally. If Patricia is removed and reasonable people are in charge, what would you want as a resolution? I'd been thinking about this a lot. Honestly, I'd be willing to sell the property to the HOA at fair market value, or I'd be open to a long-term lease arrangement. I don't need the land for anything, but I also can't just give away several $100,000 in property value. My father left me his house with a significant mortgage, and this land is part of my inheritance. I have to be practical about it. That's entirely reasonable. If we do remove Patricia and the board authorizes me to negotiate, can we sit down and work something out? Absolutely. Good, I'll be in touch. And Mr. Quade, thank you for being patient with this process. Not everyone would be as reasonable as you've been. After hanging up, I felt a glimmer of hope that this might actually resolve without destroying the park or bankrupting the HOA, but Patricia wasn't going down without a fight. 3 days before the scheduled vote, someone vandalized my father's house. I'd been staying there while sorting through his estate, and I came home from work to find the windows broken and spray paint across the siding, reading "Leave our park alone" and "Greedy scum." I called the police immediately. The officers who responded took a report and collected evidence. One of them asked if I knew who might have done this. "I'm in a dispute with the HOA over property," I explained. "It's been contentious." "The park thing?" "Yeah, I heard about that. My sister lives in Meadowbrook. She says the HOA president has been stirring people up pretty hard. I don't know if Patricia Henderson did this personally, but the environment she's created certainly didn't help." The officer nodded. "We'll investigate. Make sure you document everything and consider installing security cameras if you haven't already." I'd already ordered cameras after the threatening emails, but they hadn't arrived yet. Now I expedited the shipping. The vandalism actually backfired on Patricia. Several residents publicly condemned the act, and even some of her supporters started distancing themselves. Destroying someone's property over a legal dispute crossed a line that most people weren't willing to defend. The vote came on a Wednesday evening. I didn't attend the meeting, but Victor called me immediately afterward. She's out. Patricia has been removed from the board by a vote of 73% of the homeowners. I've been appointed interim president, and the board has authorized settlement negotiations with you. That's great news. Can you meet tomorrow? I'd like to bring our attorney, a neutral appraiser, and 2 other board members. We want to do this right. We met the next afternoon at a conference room in a local library, neutral territory. Victor brought Marcus, the original HOA attorney, who looked relieved to be working toward a solution rather than pointless litigation. They also brought an appraiser and 2 other board members, including Susan from the original meeting. First, Victor said, I want to apologize on behalf of the HOA for how this was handled. You were treated poorly, and that's not acceptable. I appreciate that. Second, we've filed a claim with our title insurance. The insurance company has acknowledged that this situation should be covered under our policy. They're sending their own appraiser, but preliminary discussions suggest they'll cover the cost of purchasing the property from you at fair market value. What about the lawsuit? We're withdrawing it, and we'd appreciate if you'd withdraw your counterclaim. We can include a release of all claims in the settlement agreement. Marcus added, the insurance company will also cover the HOA's legal fees and yours, within reason. They want this resolved quickly and cleanly. The appraiser they'd brought presented his evaluation. Based on comparable sales in the location, I'm valuing the property at $420,000. That's for the 3 acres in question. It was more than I'd expected, but in line with what my appraiser had estimated. That seems fair, Victor nodded. We'd like to propose the following. The HOA, through its title insurance, will purchase the property from you for $420,000. In exchange, you'll transfer the deed and release all claims related to the property, including any claims for past use. We'll cover your reasonable attorney's fees up to $10,000. Does that work for you? I looked at Roger, who'd come with me to the meeting. He nodded slightly. That works, I said. When can we close? The title insurance company wants to do its own due diligence, but they're estimating 3 to 4 weeks. I can live with that. We shook hands, and the tension that had been building for weeks finally released. Susan smiled. Thank you for being reasonable about this, and I'm sorry about the vandalism. That was completely unacceptable. Do you know who did it? She hesitated. We have suspicions, but no proof. Let's just say that Patricia has a son who's been very vocal about supporting his mother. The police were still investigating, and I decided to let that process play out. Over the next 3 weeks, the title insurance company conducted its review, confirmed everything we already knew, and approved the purchase. Roger and I reviewed the settlement documents carefully, making sure everything was in order. The closing was scheduled for a Friday morning at a title company office. Victor was there, along with Marcus and a representative from the title insurance company. We signed papers for about an hour, transferring ownership of the land that had been in my family for over 60 years. When it was done, Victor shook my hand. The community is planning a small celebration at the park tomorrow. They'd like you to come, if you're willing. A thank you for being reasonable about all this. I wasn't sure how I'd be received, but I agreed to stop by. The next day, I drove to what was now officially the Meadowbrook Estates Community Park. There were balloons, a banner thanking the community for coming together, and tables of food. Victor saw me arrive and walked over with a smile. Glad you could make it. Come on, I want to introduce you to some people. Over the next hour, I met dozens of residents who thanked me for not destroying the park. Many apologized for believing Patricia's narrative without questioning it. A few even asked about my grandfather and what the land had been like before the development. It was mostly open field, I told one family. My grandfather grew hay on part of it and kept the rest wild. He liked watching the deer in the evenings. I used to visit him here when I was a kid, before the houses were built. It must have been beautiful, the mother said. It was, but this is nice too. I'm glad families are getting to enjoy it. Susan approached with a young boy. Mr. Quade, this is my grandson Tyler. He wanted to say something to you. The boy looked nervous but spoke up. Thank you for not taking away the playground. It's my favorite place. I knelt down to his level. You're welcome. Tyler, I'm glad you have a place to play. As the afternoon wore on, I felt a sense of closure. The property dispute was resolved, I'd received fair compensation, and the community got to keep their park. It wasn't a perfect outcome. Every situation like this involves some pain and conflict, but it was as good as it could have been under the circumstances. Victor found me again as I was getting ready to leave. "One more thing," he said. "The HOA board voted to install a plaque at the park entrance. It's going to acknowledge the history of the land and your grandfather's ownership. We want people to know the real story. That's thoughtful. Thank you. And there's something else. The police arrested Patricia's son, Brandon, for the vandalism. Turns out your security cameras caught him coming back a second time to key your car. He's being charged with felony vandalism and criminal mischief. I'd suspected it was him, but hearing the confirmation still felt heavy. That's unfortunate. Patricia is threatening to sue the HOA for removing her from the board. She's claiming we violated bylaws and defamed her." "Did you?" "No. We followed every procedure correctly, and we've only stated facts about her actions. Marcus says her lawsuit has no merit, but she's apparently convinced she was wronged in all this. Some people can never admit they made a mistake." Victor nodded. "True enough. Well, thank you again, Quincy. You handled this with a lot more grace than most people would have." As I drove away from the park, I thought about my grandfather and my father. They'd both held onto that land for decades, paying taxes on it, even when it seemed like it might never be worth anything. Now, because of their diligence, I'd been able to secure fair compensation for what was rightfully mine. But more than that, I'd learned something about standing up for what's right without losing your humanity in the process. It would have been easy to get angry, to immediately post no trespassing signs and sue everyone in sight. But that wouldn't have served anyone. Instead, by staying calm and reasonable, by being willing to negotiate while also refusing to be taken advantage of, I'd reached an outcome that worked for everyone. Well, almost everyone. Patricia was still sending angry letters to board members and threatening legal action. But that was her problem now, not mine. About 2 months after the settlement closed, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. Brandon Henderson had pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and vandalism. As part of his sentence, he was required to pay restitution for the damage to my father's house, complete 200 hours of community service, and attend anger management counseling. Patricia, meanwhile, had filed her lawsuit against the HOA but had quickly run into problems. The judge dismissed most of her claims in a preliminary hearing, finding that the HOA had acted within its authority. She was appealing, but Marcus told me it was unlikely to go anywhere. I'd finished settling my father's estate and decided to keep his house rather than selling it. Portland was growing on me, and having a place that connected me to my father and grandfather felt right. I hired contractors to repair the vandalism damage and even upgraded a few things while I was at it. One evening in early fall, I drove past the park just to see how it looked. The leaves were starting to turn, and kids were playing on the equipment in the golden late afternoon light. The plaque Victor had mentioned was installed near the entrance. I parked and walked over to read it. Meadowbrook Community Park. This land was owned by the Quade family from 1962 to 2026. We thank William Quade, Robert Quade, and Quincy Quade for their stewardship of this property, and for working with our community to preserve this space for future generations. It was simple and respectful. I stood there for a moment, remembering my grandfather teaching me to identify different types of trees on this land, my father bringing me here one last time before the houses went up, pointing out where the old fence line had been. "Nice plaque, isn't it?" A voice behind me made me turn. Victor was there with a dog on a leash. "I didn't know you had a dog. Got her last month. She loves the park." He paused. "You know, I've been thinking about what happened here, and I wanted to tell you something. You had every right to be difficult about this. You could have demanded more money, dragged things out, made everyone miserable. But you didn't. You gave us a chance to do the right thing. You're the one who made it happen. You and the other board members who stood up to Patricia, maybe. But it wouldn't have mattered if you'd been unreasonable. The fact that you were willing to negotiate made all the difference." He looked at the plaque. "We learned a lot from this experience. The new board has implemented better record-keeping procedures. We're requiring title searches on all common areas, and we're being much more transparent with homeowners about decisions and finances. That's good. HOAs can serve a real purpose, but they need accountability." "Exactly." Victor's dog tugged on the leash, eager to explore. "I should let you go, but thank you, Quincy, for everything." I watched him walk away, then looked back at the park one more time. Children were still playing, parents were chatting on benches, and somewhere in the distance I could hear a basketball bouncing on the court. The land my grandfather had loved was serving a new purpose now, bringing joy to hundreds of families. It wasn't what he'd envisioned when he bought those 36 acres back in 1962, but I think he would have approved. He'd always believed in community and in doing what was right, even when it was hard. I'd tried to honor that in how I'd handled this situation. As I walked back to my car, I noticed a woman planting flowers near the entrance. She looked up and smiled. "Are you Quincy Quade?" I'm Jennifer. My kids play here almost every day. I just wanted to say thank you. We were all so worried we'd lose this place. I'm glad you didn't have to. Patricia told us you were this terrible person trying to steal from us. I believed her at first. But then I actually looked into the situation, and I realized you were just trying to protect what was yours. I felt awful for judging you without knowing the facts. It's easy to get caught up in what people tell us, especially when they're in positions of authority. Don't beat yourself up about it. Still, I'm sorry, and I'm grateful for how you handled everything. These conversations happened more often than I expected over the following months. I'd be at the grocery store getting coffee, and someone from Meadowbrook Estates would recognize me and want to talk. Most were apologetic and thankful. A few still believed Patricia's version of events and gave me cold looks, but they were in the minority. Patricia herself remained bitter. She started a blog detailing her grievances against the HOA board, against me, and against what she called the corrupt title insurance industry. The blog attracted a small following of people who believed HOAs were under attack from greedy property owners and overreaching legal systems. She appeared on a few fringe podcasts, always presenting herself as the victim of a conspiracy. Her lawsuit against the HOA dragged on for another 8 months before a judge finally dismissed it with prejudice, meaning she couldn't refile. The judge's order included some pointed language about frivolous litigation and wasting the court's time. Patricia was ordered to pay the HOA's attorney fees, which came to nearly $30,000. She declared bankruptcy shortly after. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall. She'd created her own problems by refusing to be honest and reasonable, but watching someone spiral like that wasn't pleasant. Her son Brandon completed his community service and seemed to be getting his life together, at least according to what I heard through the neighborhood grapevine. A year after the settlement, Victor invited me to a community event at the park. "We're doing a time capsule," he explained. "We want to include some history of the land, and we'd love if you'd contribute something about your grandfather." I agreed and spent an evening going through old photographs and documents. I found a picture of my grandfather standing in the field that was now the park, probably from the 1970s based on his clothes and the style of the photo. He was smiling, holding a fishing rod with tall grass around him. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "Good day at the pond, 1977. I made a copy of the photo and wrote a short letter to include with it, describing my grandfather's love for the land and his belief in community. At the time capsule ceremony, I stood in front of about 50 residents and shared the story. My grandfather bought this land because he wanted a place where he could be close to nature, I said. He worked in construction his whole life, building houses and buildings all over Portland, but this land was his retreat, his place to breathe. He used to tell me that land has a purpose, and sometimes that purpose changes. This land's purpose now is to give families a place to gather, kids a place to play, and a community a place to call their own. I think he'd be happy about that." People applauded, and several came up afterward to share their own thoughts about the park and what it meant to them. A teenager told me she'd had her first kiss on one of the benches. An older couple said they'd gotten engaged at the picnic area. A single father talked about how the park had been a lifeline during a difficult divorce, giving his kids stability and normalcy. These stories reminded me why the fight had been worth it. Not just to secure my inheritance, though that mattered, but to do it in a way that preserved something valuable for other people. Property rights are important, but so is community. Finding the balance between those things isn't always easy, but it's always worth trying. The time capsule was buried near the entrance, next to the plaque. It was scheduled to be opened in 50 years, in 2076. I wondered what the world would look like then, whether the park would still be here, whether anyone would remember this story. As I was leaving that day, a little girl ran up to me. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7. "Are you the man who owned the park?" "I used to own the land, yes, thank you for letting us have it. This is my favorite place in the whole world." She ran back to her parents before I could respond, but her words stayed with me. This is my favorite place in the whole world. How many people could say they'd played a role, however reluctantly, in creating someone's favorite place? I thought about Patricia and how differently things could have gone. If she'd been honest from the start, if she'd brought my father's letter to the board, if she'd been willing to negotiate fairly, none of the conflict would have been necessary. The outcome would have been the same, the HOA buying the land at fair value, but without all the anger and division. But that wasn't who Patricia was. She'd built her identity around being in control, being right, being the protector of the community. Admitting error would have shattered that identity, so she'd chosen to fight instead. In the end, it had cost her everything: her position, her reputation, her financial stability. There was a lesson in that, though I wasn't entirely sure what it was. Something about the importance of honesty, about being willing to admit mistakes, about prioritizing solutions over ego. Patricia's story was a cautionary tale, while Victor's approach, taking responsibility and working toward resolution, showed what good leadership looked like. I continued living in Portland, settling into my father's house and my new life there. The money from the land sale allowed me to pay off the mortgage and make some investments. I found a job I liked, made some friends, and started to feel at home in a way I hadn't expected. The park became part of my routine. I'd drive past it on my way to work, sometimes stopping to walk through on weekend mornings. It was strange seeing playground equipment and picnic tables where my grandfather had once grown hay, but it was also satisfying. The land was serving people, bringing happiness, creating memories. One Saturday morning, about 18 months after the settlement, I was walking through the park when I noticed they'd planted new trees along the western edge. Small plaques in front of each tree indicated they'd been donated by residents in memory of loved ones. One caught my eye: "In memory of Robert Quade, who helped preserve this park for our community." I stood there staring at it, unexpected emotion welling up. Someone had planted a tree in my father's memory. I hadn't known about this. Victor appeared beside me. "I should have told you we were doing that. I'm sorry." "Who planted it?" "Actually, it was a group of us. When we heard your father had reached out to Patricia trying to resolve this situation before he passed, we felt like he deserved to be honored. He tried to do the right thing, even though she ignored him." I touched the small maple tree, its leaves bright green in the morning sun. "Thank you. He would have liked this. We thought about asking your permission first, but we wanted it to be a surprise. If you'd rather we move it somewhere else, or if you'd prefer something different, we can do that." "No, this is perfect, really." We stood there quietly for a moment, then Victor said, "You know, this whole experience changed how I think about property and community. I used to see them as separate things, sometimes competing, but they're connected. Property rights matter because they give people security and autonomy. Community matters because we need each other. The challenge is finding ways to respect both." "That's more philosophical than I expected from an HOA board president." He laughed. "Retired real estate attorney, remember? I've seen a lot of property disputes over the years. Most of them end badly because people dig in and stop seeing each other as human beings. This one ended well because you refused to let that happen. You helped. We all helped. That's the point." A group of kids ran past us, heading for the swings. Their laughter echoed across the field where my grandfather had once stood with his fishing rod, where my father had walked me through the tall grass, where I'd fought to protect what was rightfully mine while also recognizing what it meant to others. The land had changed hands, but its purpose endured: to be a place where life happened, where memories were made, where people found joy and peace and community. That was worth more than any dollar amount, though the fair compensation mattered too. As I left the park that morning, I felt a sense of completion. The story that had begun with my grandfather's purchase in 1962, that had continued through my father's stewardship, that had erupted into conflict with an HOA, had finally reached its proper ending. The land was being honored, the community was thriving, and justice had been served. Patricia's blog eventually went silent. Brandon got a job and moved to Seattle. Marcus continued representing the HOA, which under Victor's leadership became known for its fairness and transparency. The park remained the heart of Meadowbrook Estates, hosting birthday parties and summer concerts and quiet evening walks. And I remained part of the story, not as the villain Patricia had tried to make me, nor as the hero some residents wanted to paint me, but as someone who'd stood up for what was right in a way that left room for others to do the same. That felt like enough. Sometimes, late in the evening, I'd drive past the park and see the lights from the houses surrounding it, warm and welcoming. I'd think about the hundreds of families living their lives there, most of them never knowing the complicated history of the land their community was built around. That was fine. They didn't need to know every detail. They just needed to enjoy the park, to make their memories, to live their lives. My grandfather's land had found its purpose after all, just not the one he'd originally intended. But purpose is like that sometimes. It evolves, adapts, becomes something unexpected. The key is being flexible enough to recognize it when it appears, and wise enough to honor it when it does. The last time I saw the park was on a summer evening 2 years after the settlement. I'd been offered a job in Seattle and was moving away from Portland. Before I left, I wanted to say goodbye to the place that had connected me to my grandfather and father, that had taught me about standing firm and bending gracefully, that had shown me the complicated balance between individual rights and community good. The park was hosting a summer festival. Food trucks lined the parking lot, a band played on a temporary stage, and it seemed like half the neighborhood was there. I walked through the crowd, anonymous now, just another person enjoying the evening. I stopped at my father's tree. It had grown noticeably in 2 years, its branches reaching higher. Someone had placed a small American flag near it for the summer celebration. I touched the bark gently. "Thank you," I whispered, though I wasn't entirely sure who I was thanking. My grandfather for buying the land, my father for holding on to it, the residents for appreciating it, Victor for resolving the conflict. Maybe all of them. As I walked back to my car, a voice called out, "Quincy!" I turned to see Susan hurrying toward me. "I heard you were moving away. I wanted to say goodbye and thank you one more time." "You don't need to keep thanking me." "Maybe not, but I want to. What you did, how you handled everything, it set an example for this community. We're better because of it. The community is better because people like you and Victor stepped up. Well, we all did our part." She handed me a card. "This is from the HOA board. Just a little something to remember us by." Inside was a gift card to a Seattle restaurant and a note signed by all the current board members, wishing me well and thanking me for my patience and reasonableness during the property dispute. I was more touched than I expected to be. "Thank you. Really. Stay in touch, okay? You're part of our community history now." As I drove away from Meadowbrook Estates for the last time, I looked in the rearview mirror at the park, lit up with string lights and full of people enjoying a summer evening. That image would stay with me, a reminder that sometimes doing the right thing is complicated and messy and requires standing up for yourself while also recognizing the needs of others. The HOA had called it their park, but my grandfather's deed had said otherwise. In the end, though, what mattered wasn't who was technically right about ownership. What mattered was finding a solution that honored the law, respected property rights, acknowledged community needs, and left everyone better off than they'd been before. It hadn't been easy. It had involved conflict and frustration and even vandalism, but by staying focused on fairness rather than winning, on solutions rather than scoring points, we'd reached an outcome that worked. The park was preserved, I was fairly compensated, and the community learned important lessons about transparency, accountability, and respecting both individual rights and collective good. As I merged onto the highway towards Seattle and my new life, I thought about that little girl who'd told me the park was her favorite place in the whole world. That made everything worthwhile. My grandfather's land was creating joy and memories for a new generation, fulfilling a purpose he never imagined but would have appreciated. And that, in the end, was the best resolution I could have hoped for. Not a victory, not a defeat, but a fair outcome that honored everyone involved and preserved something valuable for the future. Sometimes that's all you can ask for, and sometimes it's more than enough. The story of the park and the HOA and my family's land would live on in the community's memory, marked by a plaque in my father's tree and the time capsule buried near the entrance. Future generations would know that once there was a dispute, that once there was conflict, and that somehow people found a way through it that left everyone better off. That was the real lesson, the one worth remembering long after the specific details faded. When faced with conflict, you can choose escalation or resolution, division or community, winning at all costs or finding fair outcomes. The choice isn't always easy, but it's always important. I chose resolution, fairness, and community, and in doing so, I honored my grandfather's memory, protected my inheritance, and helped preserve something valuable for people I'd never meet. That felt like the right end to the story, the proper way to close this chapter of my life. The park would go on without me, hosting festivals and birthday parties and quiet evening walks. Children would play on the swings, parents would chat on the benches, and teenagers would shoot basketball on the court. The land my grandfather loved would continue serving its new purpose, and that was exactly as it should be. As Portland disappeared behind me and Seattle appeared ahead, I felt at peace with everything that had happened. The conflict with the HOA, as difficult as it had been, had taught me important lessons about standing firm on principles while remaining open to compromise, about defending what's yours while also recognizing the legitimate needs of others. Patricia had seen the situation as zero-sum. Either she won and kept the park without acknowledgement or payment, or I won and destroyed the community. But life rarely works that way. Most situations, even seemingly intractable ones, have solutions that honor multiple interests if people are willing to look for them. The key is being firm on core principles while flexible on details, knowing what matters and what doesn't, recognizing when to stand your ground and when to bend. I'd wanted recognition of my property rights and fair compensation. The community had wanted to keep their park. Both outcomes were achievable, but only if both sides were willing to work together. Patricia's refusal to do that had cost her everything. My willingness to do it had given me a fair settlement, a good experience of community, and valuable life lessons. The contrast couldn't have been clearer. As the miles rolled by and my old life faded into the rearview mirror, I felt grateful for the experience, difficult as it had been. I'd inherited more than land from my grandfather and father. I'd inherited their values, their sense of fairness, their commitment to doing right even when it was hard. And I'd been able to honor that inheritance in how I'd handled the dispute. The park would stand as a testament to that, not just to my family's ownership of the land, but to our values and to the power of fair dealing and good faith negotiation. Future generations playing there would never know the full story, but they'd benefit from it nonetheless. And really, that was the point. Not recognition or credit or even full understanding, but making things better for people you'd never meet, solving problems in ways that created value rather than destroyed it, leaving places better than you found them. My grandfather had bought the land for his own reasons. My father had held on to it for his, and I'd resolved the dispute over it in mine. Each generation had done its part, had fulfilled its responsibility, had passed something valuable forward. Now the land belonged to the community, legally and properly, purchased at fair value through insurance that existed for exactly this purpose. The HOA had clear title, the residents could enjoy their park without worry, and I had fair compensation for property that was rightfully mine. Everyone won, which meant no one won entirely, which meant it was a good outcome. That's how real life works when people approach problems with good faith and reasonable expectations. The sun was setting as I reached Seattle, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Tomorrow I'd start my new job, meet new people, begin building a new life. But I'd carry the lessons from Meadowbrook Estates with me. That property rights matter, that community matters, that fairness matters, and that sometimes the hardest battles are worth fighting if you fight them the right way. The park was no longer mine, but it would always be part of my story. And that story had ended the right way, not with a villain defeated or a hero triumphant, but with a community preserved, a family honored, and justice served. In a complicated world, that simple outcome felt like a genuine achievement.